Hell in the Swamps, a town gripped by disappearances. Picture Louisiana in 1905, a world where thick swamp fog could hide anything, and city life felt a million miles away. That year, in the wilderness near Shreveport, the first whispers started about travelers who vanished on forgotten country roads. Horses came back alone, wagons left in the brush, but never a body, never a clue. It was like the land itself had eaten them whole. Locals exchanged nervous stories at the market, tales of families setting out for a new life and simply blinking out of existence, leaving their Sunday clothes and savings behind. Even old-timers raised on Cajun legends got uneasy. Folks would warn, "Don't trust a shadow in these swamps." And it wasn't just superstition. American swamplands have always had their own dark mysteries, like the lost settlers of Roanoke, or the countless missing whose names have faded into the mire. With every disappearance, that bone-deep fear grew. Was it bandits? Voodoo? Something worse? Everyone knew the swamps had secrets, and the only thing scarier than the stories were the silences that followed them. If you've ever driven a lonely back road at night, or walked through woods where the only sound is your heartbeat, have you felt that chill up your spine? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this is your first journey into the Vault of Vile, subscribe right now, because what's coming will shake you, and you won't want to miss what I'm about to reveal. But the scariest rumors aren't just stories. These disappearances, they hid a horrifying truth, one nobody in town was ready to face. The Broussards, an isolated family like no other. At the center of this nightmare was a family almost no one in the region really knew. The Broussard. In the heart of the Louisiana swamps, their property sat surrounded by cypress and murky water, nearly 2 hours from the nearest neighbor. 14 souls lived there but kept to themselves. Most folks only glimpsed them from afar, if at all. Cléos Broussard, 75, ruled as undisputed matriarch. She was small, stooped, but her stare could freeze anyone in their tracks. All said her son and the official patriarch was a silent, haunted-looking man with massive, scarred hands. Cordelia, his half-sister, ran the women and children. Her voice could hush any squabble. The rest, Beauregard, Magnolia, Eulalie, Boudreaux, each with their own twisted spot in the family order. 7 kids filled the ranks, too, from the stone-faced teenager Thibodeau down to 6-year-old Azeli, a silent, staring presence no one dared approach. But here's where it gets truly unsettling. Over decades, the Broussards married only each other, sibling to sibling, cousin to cousin, even parent to child sometimes. It wasn't just a closed community, it was a genetic echo chamber. Neighbors quietly noted their flat features, the odd way some of the children spoke or shied away from sunlight. Bodies thin, movements odd, yet there was something intelligent flickering in their eyes. Isolation wasn't rare in the Deep South, but this was extreme, even compared to America's other infamous inbred clans, like the Sawney Beans of Scottish legend or tales coming out of Appalachia's hollers. Some locals whispered that pure blood had taken on a whole new meaning in those woods. Now I want to ask you, would you ever visit a place as remote and insular as this? Do you believe isolation can truly breed this kind of horror? Or does it take something more? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. Before we continue, if dark stories like this grab your imagination, give this video a like to help spread these warnings from history. But the Broussard family's odd customs and silence hid something so much darker than anyone guessed. Sudden prosperity and suspicious meat, the first disturbing signs. Something changed in 1901. The Broussards, always half-starved and dressed in rags, suddenly looked healthier. Their kids no longer moved with that hungry, desperate twitch. Their clothes were cleaner, their boots newer, and they came into town more often, always to trade meat. A lot of meat. It caught the attention of local merchants. The Broussards brought sack after sack of salted meat, supposedly swamp game, but it was too much, too regular, and never matched the region's hunting seasons. The cuts were too uniform for wild-caught animals. The salt hid a strange aroma, almost sweet, that made the shopkeepers queasy. One merchant swore it was neither venison nor pork, and no one who tried to cook it at home could quite stomach the taste. This wasn't just unnerving. Back then, food safety was barely a concept. Meat could be anything, and sellers weren't questioned unless someone got ill. In other places and times, there were tales of mystery meat hitting markets during rough years. Think about the Cleveland torso murders decades later, where fear of hidden flesh made people double-check every butcher shop. But here, there were no labels, no inspectors, just trust and local rumor. To give you an idea, the family traded so much meat, it outpaced what the best hunters in the parish could catch in a year. People started wondering aloud, where was this bounty coming from? Why did the Broussard children sniff the butcher's wares with a look of disappointment, as if nothing measured up? What would you have done if your neighbor offered you meat that just didn't seem right? Ever suspected something odd at your local store or restaurant? Share your thoughts below. Stick with us, because soon people would demand answers. And the investigation that followed is pure nightmare fuel. You won't believe what the townsfolk uncovered next. The pattern of vanishing families. As the months slipped by, the disappearances only ramped up. At first, a single family would vanish every few months. By 1902, it became a grim routine. Travelers heading for a new life found only by their empty wagons, their horses tied to trees, the goods untouched. No blood, no footprints, just silence. Whole families, parents, children, all gone without a trace. And the pattern was impossible to ignore. It started with one wagon found abandoned, then another and another, all in the same lonely patch of backcountry, never far from the Broussard property. Sheriff Landry, who thought he'd seen the worst human nature could offer, was stumped. Local newspapers ran breathless headlines about a curse in the swamp. Merchants and farmhands avoided those roads at night or refused to travel alone. Fear spread like wildfire. By 1903, an average of one family per month simply disappeared into the Louisiana dark. This wasn't just local panic. History is dotted with cases where whole groups vanished, never to be seen again. Roanoke Colony, the Flannan Isles Keepers, even waves of missing prospectors in the Wild West. But here, in Shreveport, there was a creeping sense that this was no accident, no force of nature. Someone, or something, was making families disappear systematically. Have you heard of other places where entire families vanished without a trace? Maybe your town has a story locals don't talk about at night. Drop your legends in the comments. I love reading about mysterious vanishings from wherever you're watching. Before we continue, what happened next shocked the community to its core. The signs grew too clear to ignore, and soon, the first hard evidence would come crawling out of the swamp. Clues from the swamp. Priest and sheriff close in. When families disappear, sooner or later, someone starts looking for answers. In this story, it was Father Gilbert Horton, a quiet priest who just wanted to serve his flock, but who couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong at the Broussard property. He started taking walks along the swamp trails, watching for anything out of the ordinary. One sticky afternoon, he caught a scent on the breeze, sickly sweet and strangely familiar. Following it off the main path, he stumbled upon fabric poking out from the churned-up earth. Not old rags, but pieces of clothes, children's shoes, and personal effects half buried in the mud. With shaking hands, Horton pulled out tiny toys, jewelry, even a blood-stained rag doll. It was enough to chill the soul of a man used to funeral rites. He wrote everything down in his diary, praying for some explanation less horrible than the one looming in his mind. But guilt ate at him. He finally brought his evidence to Sheriff Landry, a veteran lawman now forced to confront real, human evil. Together, they organized a search party and trudged through the knee-deep muck, dogs barking and men gagging against the stench. In less than 2 hours, they found a burial ground. Not just clothes and keepsakes, but bones. Dozens, maybe hundreds, some small enough to have belonged to children. Animal bones were mixed in, but a doctor on the team quickly recognized the difference. Cut marks on the remains suggested not just killing, but careful butchering, work done by someone with grim expertise. You know, there are other dark chapters where it's taken one outsider, a neighbor or a priest, to tug the first thread and unravel horrors. Think of the Hinterkaifeck murders in Germany. A family slaughtered, only detected when someone finally couldn't ignore the signs. Imagine, would you have the courage to investigate if you suspected your neighbors were hiding something this dark? Or would you turn away? Let me know in the comments. If this story is giving you chills, share it with a friend who loves mysteries. Let's see who can sleep after this one. Because what they found on the Broussard land was beyond imagining, and the town would never sleep easy again. The cannibal industry unveiled, inside the Broussard operation. What came next felt ripped from the worst nightmare. Sheriff Landry and his men approached the Broussard property heavily armed, not sure if they were catching criminals or walking into something unearthly. Up close, the place was even stranger. Haphazard sheds, a main house with shuttered windows, all surrounded by creeping vines and swamp mist. Inside the first outbuilding, the deputies found an improvised slaughterhouse. Old wood tables, knives of every shape, iron hooks dangling from rafters. The floor was stained dark, years of dried blood mixed with something stickier. There were bone saws, barrels of salt, smoking racks, and storage shelves. It was clear. This was no regular farmstead operation. The sheer amount of gear would make your stomach turn. What truly horrified investigators was the organization. There were areas for every step. Slaughter, skinning, butchering, salting, smoking, storing. Jars were labeled in French with chilling details, meat by cut, age, and even quality. One shelf held trophies, buttons, rings, children's ribbons. Another book listed every harvest, written in old script, tracking victims as if they were livestock. As the search widened, they uncovered pits of bones mixed with animal remains, meticulously buried, as if hiding not just bodies, but the history of what had happened here. One investigator later compared it to the murder castle, built by H. Holmes in Chicago. Except this was a family affair, built on generations of secrecy and swamp know-how. Elsewhere in the world, you had the Chijon family in Korea, or the real-life inspiration for Texas Chainsaw. A reminder that these horrors are not just stories or myths. The scale hit hard. The Broussards had engineered an entire industry around murder, supplying the local blacklist with meat cut, preserved, and sold like any butcher's product. The work was so systematic, it actually outmatched many legitimate businesses nearby. Can you imagine what it would be like to discover that your town traded in human flesh, years without even knowing? Would your community ever recover from that? Comment below on how your own town might react. And remember, subscribe and ring the notification bell. Because what investigators learned next from the Broussards' very own confessions will haunt you for a long time. Their logic for what they did sent chills down every spine in court. Interrogations and the chilling family mentality. After the arrests, investigators faced a new abyss, the minds of the Broussards. Clemens, the iron-willed matriarch, sat stone-faced through every question. She claimed they'd broken no laws, just fed the family as any sensible farmer would. Cordelia, her daughter, spoke with disturbing calm, her pride in the family's methods clearer than any guilt. They described their craft in the way a chef might discuss recipes, cuts, seasoning, curing, a routine perfected through years of practice. The children were the most unsettling. Octave, Sidonie, the twins, even little Azalee. They spoke of hunting and butchering without shame or fear. For them, this was normal life. They'd been raised from birth knowing only this cycle: isolation, inbreeding, secrecy, and cannibalism. In their minds, there was no line between prey and stranger. Meat is meat, family is family, and business is business. It was a logic that only made sense within those swamp walls. Medical examinations confirmed everyone's fears. 4 generations of family interbreeding had left lasting marks. Foot deformities, twisted jaws, speech patterns no outsider could follow, mental delays that blurred lines between right and wrong. And while inbred clans have popped up elsewhere, the Sawney Beans of legend, the Blue Fugates of Kentucky, the Broussard story stood apart for its sheer organization and total lack of remorse. Modern psychologists might call it moral insanity. Sometimes cults or infamous cases like Jonestown reveal a group's shared detachment from the outside world's values. The Broussards had become their own society, immune to outside judgment, grooming each new child to accept horror as tradition. Do you think the children deserve blame, or were they fully victims, conditioned from birth to see evil as everyday life? Share what you think in the comments. There's no easy answer. Before we go to the harrowing aftermath, has any story made your skin crawl as much as this one? Because the final chapter is as haunting as anything that came before. Justice, aftermath, and lingering terrors. The trial of the Broussards became a national spectacle. The courthouse packed with townsfolk, newspapermen, and those desperate for answers. Cleos, unmoved by her death sentence, only scorned the court's ignorance about survival, still insisting she did only what was needed to feed her blood. Cordelia, equally unrepentant, relentlessly defended the family's brutal efficiency, even correcting the prosecutor about butchering methods as if she were teaching a class. But what about the children? That question tormented everyone. Medical reports showed years of damage, both of the mind and the body. The courts decided to send them to orphanages and religious homes, hoping they could be fixed. Sadly, many didn't last long. Octave and Sidonie never really adapted, dying young and confused by a world that seemed upside down. The twins, separated for safety, became violent and withdrawn, haunted by memories others couldn't even imagine. Little Azalee, by some miracle, adjusted. She eventually found a family out of state and lived a normal life, but never spoke of her past. As for the swamp itself, the Broussard property was burned to the ground, flames fed by years of soaked-in fat and blood, the smoke hanging over the trees for days. Locals avoided the place for years, swearing they felt watched or heard cries at dusk. Even as late as the 1920s and 30s, fishermen reported odd lights or the echo of voices deep in the cypress. And what became of the fugitives? Some believe the last Broussards died lost in the swamps, their end as grim as the crimes they'd committed, maybe even turning on each other when food ran out. Others whispered that a few survived, forever lurking where outsiders dare not tread. What's certain is that the horror didn't evaporate with the fire. To this day, the woods are said to be cursed ground, and children are still warned never to wander close after dark. Would you dare visit such a site today, knowing everything that happened there? Have you ever felt chills while exploring abandoned places, or heard stories about haunted land? Share your own ghost stories or sightings in the comments. Hit like if you believe true crime can be stranger and scarier than fiction. And remember, even after justice was served, the swamp would not stay silent for long. The Broussard Legacy. Dark lessons from real monsters. The story of the Broussards leaves us with questions that keep echoing long after the fire dies down. There were no curses or demons at work, just people, isolated from society, whose traditions turned monstrous. 14 family members, including innocent children, raised to believe that murder and cannibalism were not only normal but necessary. When outside eyes finally looked their way, it was already too late. Cases like this force us to confront the thin line between civilization and the abyss. You don't have to look just to rural Louisiana. World history is littered with isolated groups hiding ugly secrets, like the Maurova family in the Czech Republic, or the hidden wolf children of post-war Europe. Sometimes communities only discover these horrors after years or generations of turning a blind eye. Modern criminology tells us that isolation, secrecy, and absolute authority can warp moral compasses faster than we want to believe. Abuse goes unchecked, rituals get twisted, and that makes us ask, could something like the Broussards happen again? Could it be happening right now, just out of sight? After all, the real monster is the neighbor you never meet. Even today, the impact lingers in the region. Rural roads go unused. Old families glance suspiciously at newcomers, and the land itself feels tainted by what was done. Folklore took over, with ghost stories and midnight dares playing out for generations. But the deeper fear is always this: if monsters are just people, how do we ever see them coming? And how do we stop them before it's too late? What other real-life cases have haunted you? And do you think society could truly spot a family like the Broussards before tragedy strikes? Let's talk about it in the comments. Your stories might be the warning someone else needs. Make sure you subscribe and tap the notification bell. Vault of Vile has even darker tales looming on the edge of history. Drop a comment with your scariest family legend and share this story if it left you shaken. Because the night hides many secrets, and some are still waiting to be found.